In the first one, we dealt with the regional outlook and country perspectives, whereas in the second, it was about different models of financing, the trend that exists in financing in the energy sector, and how these models should be adopted to the new trends in that sector. In this afternoon session, which is the last one, we'll have a closer look at investors in that sector, how they interact. We're going to have three distinguished speakers with on-hand experience from the market. They will give us their own perspective in the energy sector. The first presentation is going to be by Dr. Mansur Durrani, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Project Finance in the National Commercial Bank. Dr. Durrani is the Senior Vice President and Head of Project Finance. He joined the bank, National Commercial Bank, in 2005 and built the project finance business from scratch. In his current role, he led business/financial due diligence and Islamic structuring across a range of core infrastructure sectors like petrochemicals, water and power, oil and gas, metals and mining, roads and ports, among others. The list of these projects is long, worth more than USD 100 billion. Dr. Durrani has also played a key role in large equity capital deals in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. Prior to the National Commercial Bank, Mansur held various positions in private equity, corporate finance, acquisition finance, and the investment banking space for over 12 years. He has worked and advised on a number of prominent organizations in India, the UK, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, including Lazar Izar Group, International Investment Bank, and the IDB. Recipient of New Voice in Islamic Finance Award from the Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates, Mansur figured in world's top 20 Islamic finance professionals in 2012 by the UK's GIF magazine. He received his MBA from TIU Missouri and PhD from Loughborough University. Based on his PhD, Macmillan UK published a widely applauded book, Venture Capital, Islamic Finance and SMEs, which is selling in over 70 countries. Each presentation in this afternoon session will be allocated 20 minutes, and then if we have time, we'll open the floor for some discussion. Dr. Durrani, the floor is yours.
First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Nasreen and Dr. Ali Ahmed for bringing me to AUB. This is a place which, one of those very few places in the world which you instantly fall in love with. And I've been outside the university before on my previous visit to Beirut, but I didn't know that it's so beautiful from inside. So thank you for having me inside the university, Dr. Nasreen and Dr. Ali. Before this short presentation, it's about 8 to 10 slides. I'd like to share some numbers which have been released very recently. We all know that the fossil fuel prices have dropped in 2015. For instance, crude Brent dropped by about 67%. These are just 2015 numbers. Coal dropped by about 35% on the Northwest Europe hub, international coal prices, and natural gas dropped by about 48% on Henry hub in the US. So when you see such a big drop in the fuel prices, you expect that these fuels should be firing power plants. But when you compare these numbers with the last year's numbers, which was partially shared by in the Aramco presentation in the previous session, that in 2015, $329 billion of renewable energy projects were set up across the globe. This is all-time high, and compared to the last year, 2014, this was 4% more than the 2014 of $316 billion. Now, this explains something which is happening in the energy market, is that while the fuel prices are dropping, the cheaper fuel, which is available economically, is not being used for generating electricity. It's the other fuel that's being used. As we heard, is that the $330 billion worth of projects were in the renewable sector, and they generated 121 gigabytes of electricity, almost 50% through wind and solar. What is interesting is that this, in terms of dollar, this was only 4% more than the previous year, but in terms of the capacity generation, it was 30% more. So you see the difference, that the 4% more dollars generated 30% more electricity. And that shows that how rapidly the cost of technology of alternative fuel is declining. This also shows that going forward in the coming years and decades, where exactly the world is moving in terms of fuel and therefore the quality of our environment. And all these numbers came before the Paris, signing of the Paris conference in late December 2015. So that's going to basically give more impetus towards the cleaner energy. Here I have a presentation which is basically a short case study of the first solar power done through project financing in the GCC, which was Dubai Solar IPP. Last year we closed the deal. It is part of the 1,000 megawatt plan for renewables in Dubai Solar Park. Originally, the plan was to have a 100 megawatt first phase power plant, but looking at the structuring that we did and also the kind of mind-boggling EPC prices that we locked up, it was quickly doubled from $100 megawatt to 200 megawatt. So this is just for your information. This is a very short presentation so that you don't go off to sleep right in the beginning. Just about 8 to 10 slides, and I will try and run through them as quickly as possible. This is the background of the deal that we signed last year, part of the Dubai Integrated Energy Strategy. This location is 50 kilometers from Dubai city. The planned capacity is 1,000 megawatt. The technology is more or less finalized. It's going to be PV, solar, and of course it has its own positive environmental impact. I think in terms of technical details, probably I'm the least qualified in this room to discuss about the technology, so I'll skip this slide and also this slide. Am I audible? Am I loud and clear? Okay. Now, when you attract private financing for a long tenor transaction, the most important document for raising long-term financing is the power purchase agreement. This is the centerpiece of any private sector financing for power projects. This is a well-established template that has been used for fossil fuel-based power plants in the region and elsewhere. For Dubai Solar, it was a 25-year power purchase agreement, which covered the off-takers, which is DEWA, Dubai Electricity and Water Authority's obligations towards the developer. It covered the payment terms. It covered the performances that the plant has to meet in line with the requirement of DEWA. And it covered the security aspects, which are very, very critical for bankers like us to commit a long tenor, 20-year plus financing. The most important thing that you will notice in the last block is that there are termination claims. In a termination event, almost the entire debt is covered by the off-taker, which is a government utility. And that gives a lot of comfort and a lot of confidence for bankers like us to sign up for long tenor deals. The credit support, which is backstopped by Dubai government in this case, is that if the DEWA as an off-taker fails to meet its obligations, then it's Dubai government that is going to step in. So that also played a very prominent role in attracting this financing. This is an overview of the financing plan. It was, as was mentioned, this is the detail of how the 5.84 cent per kilowatt was achieved. The EPC price was close to $300. Contingencies were close to 3, which is almost always 1% Development cost was about $12 million. And the financing costs were $9 million. Now, this is amazing for a 23-year financing, and that made all the difference between the winner and the loser. Just for your information, I said, when we support these projects, there are multiple bidders for each of these power deals. And because NCB has one of the largest project finance businesses, so we try and cover as many bidders as possible under strict Chinese walls. So I sit above the wall, and my team work under strict Chinese walls with the different bidders. So the difference between this, it made a lot of difference, because the difference between the top ranked bidder and the number 2 was about 4 to 5 cents. So that it was such a competitive bid. The project was primarily, the lead developer was Aqua Power of Saudi Arabia, joined by TSK, and the debt, it was done on 80-20 debt equity ratio. You can imagine the kind of leverage that was used in this first solar financing in the GCC. This is the transaction structure. You invariably have a special purpose vehicle, the project company, which is basically the entity awarded the concession agreement, and then they approach people like us. In this case, we structured Islamically, so they approached Islamic banks. We provided financing. DEWA joined the winning bidder after the bid was declared. So they joined the private sector developers, Aqua Power and TSK. After we provided funding, then they obviously started making payments to EPC contractor. And as always, once the plant is fully up and ready for operations, then the O&M team comes into the play. These are the key agreements that we signed as a part of the Islamic structuring that you have, and I will explain a little bit more on this on the next slide when I present the Islamic structure. So you have a procurement structure where, let me go straight to that slide. So you have a procurement structure. So the very first thing that has to happen in a private sector financing of a large power transaction is the signing of the power purchase agreement acceptable to bankers, because all the risks need to be very clearly identified and need to be very clearly boxed in for us to provide long-term financing. So the PPA was acceptable to us. We made all the markups and made it acceptable and bankable. And after that, on that basis, you basically hand over the finance documents to the developer, and they go and sign the EPC contract with the EPC contractor. Because in Islamic finance, it is a fundamental requirement that the assets have to be owned by the bank. There is no Islamic financing without underlying assets, and that's part of the reason why there's very small, almost no possibility of any speculative activity in Islamic structures, and which basically is a guarantee for economic stability. Because most of the problems that we see in the financial markets today are primarily because of very large and unchecked speculative activities. So they have to bring the asset back to us, and then we lease the asset, which is power plant, back to the developer on a long-term basis. This is how the Islamic structuring was achieved. There are some side agreements where the developer, as a lessee, is also responsible for the maintenance of the plant over the life of the PPA tenor. So all these things put together result in a few additional agreements and a few additional roles that the developer has to play. First, he has to play the role of a developer, of EPC contractor, by giving EPC contract to the actual contractor. But as far as the banks are concerned, they are responsible for completing the project and bringing the fully completed project back to the bank. And then we lease the project back to them. So these are very important document. This relationship is extremely important between the grantor and the project company. And this is also equally important because there are payment undertakings which are DEWA's obligations primarily, but they are backstopped by the Dubai government. A little bit more detail. So project company enters into a build, operate, and build, own, and operate agreement with DIVA. All participating Islamic banks, then they appoint one of them as Islamic facility agent, who basically represent all the Islamic banks, and then they give all the money to the developer. The project company enters into a procurement agreement with the EPC contractor, who builds the asset and then returns it back to the project company, and project company returns it back to the bank, and then the banks lease the project to the developer. And they receive rental payments in line with the negotiated financing costs. This is an overview of the EPC contract, typically for a solar project. So these parameters, criteria are also equally important, because, as I said, if the project is being developed on an 80-20 equity debt ratio, then you have 80% of the money going from your pocket for this project. So you have to ensure that the project is not only finished on time, but it is also capable of producing the kind of the quantity of electricity that is part of the obligation as per the PPA agreement. So you have adequate defects liabilities. You have delay LDs, which are required to cover you whole in case of delay in the construction of the plant. You have performance LDs, which again cover you in case of deficiency in the performance of the electricity generated. You have governing laws, which ensure that you are all your documents that you have signed with the EPC contractor are defendable in the court of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Durrani. No doubt Islamic financing will be playing a much more prominent role in the financing of new investment projects in the Middle East. I mean, that aside from the traditional financing that comes from usual commercial banks.